Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our online training, 4 Ways GIS Helps Fight Fraud. I'm Emily Jarvis, and here at GovLoop, I'm the Senior Online and Events Editor, and today I get the added pleasure of also being your moderator, so thanks so much for joining me. And a special thank you to our partners at Esri for helping us put on this training. And today we're talking about how data and maps can empower fraud investigations. And it's essential the government is able to address some of these challenges because improper payments are costing taxpayers more than $125 billion a year. That's billion with a B. One of the best ways to avoid these improper payments is to have stronger location tools that can help agencies fuse data from many different disciplines together to detect, make faster responses to eliminate or reduce waste in the national government. These tools also help enforce and alert the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act to constituents by sharing and bringing transparency to the federal process and harness the power of collective information. The good news is that today our experts are going to share some of their insider tips on how to actually get this done. But before I introduce our speakers, we do have a few housekeeping items to go over. We'd like this training to be as interactive as possible, so you can share what you learn on Twitter using the hashtag GLTrain. We also encourage you to ask us questions. Look for that Q&A box right there on your console, and we'll make sure to address them towards the end. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, look for that help button right there on your console, and we'll make sure to get your questions answered. Speaking of that console, we have a wealth of resources available for you to download, including today's slide deck, so make sure you click that and take it home with you. And a special note, for today's training, we will feature a couple live demos. So to enhance your viewing experience, you can increase the size of your viewing screen right there so you can better kind of see what our presenters are going to be showcasing, because trust me, you are not going to want to miss it. And by participating in this training, you are automatically awarded 1 point towards the GovLoop VIP program, through which you can receive a ton of different perks. Finally, we are recording this training, and we'll email you a link to the on-demand version tomorrow so you can share it with your colleagues or view it again. All right, with all of that housekeeping out of the way, it's time to learn a little bit more about our experts. First up, we have Mike Quinn. Mike's engineering career began with the Army Corps of Engineers as a civil engineer working on civil programs for everything from port dredging to coastal protection, military construction, flood protection, and foundation design. He joined Esri in 1999 to lead the Defense Business Development for Geospatial Technology and a Unified Combatant Command Pacific Command. He is currently the head of National Government Global Marketing. He's going to be joined by Patrick O'Brien. Patrick is the solution engineer on the emerging business team in the national government sector for Esri. He started working at Esri in September of 2015 after working for the Department of Veterans Affairs and Citygate GIS. Finally, we're going to hear from Aaron Grimm. After receiving a bachelor's in geography with a focus in GIS, Aaron has spent the last 11 and a half years immersed in GIS, the first 6 of which were in local government and range from mapping parcels to utilities to bus routes to crime activity. For the last 5.5 years, she's been in the federal space with a focus on law enforcement. Thank you all so much for being here today. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn things over to Mike and Patrick to get our discussion started. So take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you, Emily. It's a pleasure to be on this webinar, and I want to thank all who are attending for joining this webinar today. Well, we have a pretty exciting technology to show you, and we do have a special guest, Aaron, with us from the USPS, joining Patrick and I today. Together, we are going to really highlight and demonstrate some innovative and compelling GIS technology to help you detect, catch, and efficiently allocate resources for fraud, waste, and abuse. So fraud continues to be a significant problem in the national government. You know it's not just the federal government, but state, local government, and even private industry are having these same problems and issues. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, just improper payments alone made by the federal government cost taxpayers about $125 billion in 2014. Based on a $2.1 trillion budget, that's about a 5% loss to fraud alone. In some agencies providing human services, this can be as much as 30% of improper payments, and that 30% is a big hit on an organizational budget. As officials implement components of a data act, more details of how governments spend our tax dollars become more transparent and really are starting to shine a spotlight on this increasing problem for taxpayers. So, what's the problem with fraud? It's very difficult to detect. And the things that we find in this area, in this space, is that fraud is very dynamic. It happens everywhere, all the time, and we have trouble sifting through information to find it because it's so dynamic. Data is siloed. We have auditors, investigators, and inspectors really sifting through a lot of information, but they're all in different locations, and it's very difficult to put this together to come up with a better story and an understanding of what the issues are. More importantly, government programs are large with complex procedures. It's really difficult to get transparency. IG staff, they're small. They're limited in time to detect, prioritize, and even prosecute fraud. And ultimately, the scope of fraud, the budgets that are available to the Office of Inspector Generals are very small, and they have to really rely on a shoestring budget to detect this. Without new, innovative technology to help auditors and investigators with fraud, waste, and abuse, the problem will continue to grow. And according to that GOA report, that rate is about 20% a year and growing all the time. So there's 4 ways that the government is starting to do this. And this 4 ways is really based on a new strategy that is turning this around and making a difference to fight and drive efficient government. These 4 ways are: fuse disparate data sets together, help communicate and collaboration happen with all this different information, find anomalies in big data, predict and detect environments for fraud, and finally, view holistic information by time and location. All these 4 ways to do it is based on location. So let's go through one of these right now. Fuse disparate data together. Well, what's really interesting about this is taking something very simply. As Patrick gets ready, it's really about putting dots on a map, but coming from different organizations, but then starting to use distance and time as a way to correlate this information. So Patrick, please, why don't you go ahead and show some of these very interesting information that's now starting to help you find fraud.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So what Mike just mentioned is GIS giving us the ability to fuse disparate data together. We get to see the interaction of our information, and we get to show the physical locations of our data. So here what we're looking at is we're looking at dots on a map. So this is our spatially enabled data. So the orange dots indicate the hospitals. So this is looking at Medicare providers. In the gray dots, we are looking at the patients of those providers. So GIS allows us to view this information spatially in a map, but also to show the relationship between our information. So if I use this swipe tool and swipe this map to the left, it allows me to see the connection of this information. It allows us to see the connection of our patients to their providers. It allows us to also symbolize this information the way we would like to, so we can see the relationships and who is traveling long distances to go to a certain provider. This allows us to combat fraud, waste, and abuse, to just being able to visually see this information right in front of us very easily using GIS. So with that said, I'm going to pass it back to Mike, and we're going to talk about the second way fraud can detect, or GIS can detect fraud, waste, and abuse.
Thanks, Patrick. This is really interesting. I think what Patrick has really demonstrated is some of this information, dots on a map, now we're using distance here. And what we are seeing here is some odd distances where people are actually getting services for their patients or to their facilities in a very large distance. Others are, within a perimeter, which is more respectable type of travel distance. But to go from California to Idaho or to Texas is really starting to set off some alerts that this is kind of unusual activity. So really it starts with putting this kind of data simply on a map and see if we can use distance to correlate this information. So the next thing is finding anomalies faster. What we find about this information is that fraud is dynamic and big. The information is everywhere. Within government databases, sometimes this database may come from private industry, but the real challenge is, how do I dive through all this data? How do I burn down this haystack and really find that needle in the haystack? What would take me years as an analyst to go through this and find, on a spreadsheet, how can I get this down to minutes instead of years to find this information and then really apply resources to those problems? So Patrick, why don't you go ahead and talk about some of these new geoanalytic tools on this next demonstration?
Okay, thank you, Mike. So as Mike just mentioned, geoanalytics, being able to find the anomalies faster using GIS. So with this demonstration, what we're looking at here is we're looking at money wires. And with this little time-enabled map that we're seeing here, this is a small sample of the data set of money transfers around the United States. This is a gigantic data set which would take us years to sift through to try to identify the anomalies within this data, to try to identify the fraud. But using geoanalytics, we can sift through this information very quickly. So we build a model that looks something like this, that allows us to connect this model to our data and sift through all of this information very quickly. So we're taking into account 3 different attributes. One is an attribute of the data, which is the amount of money being transferred. Number 2 is we're looking at space, so where the origins of these transactions were made and where the recipient is. And finally is time, when these transactions were made going to the origin, to the recipient. So those are the 3 things we're looking at. We're looking at our data, we're looking at the space in which our data was made, and the time in which it was made. So we can identify fraudulent activity looking something like this example. So this is an example of John Doe wiring money to a recipient in Seattle underneath the $10,000 threshold. $10,000 or higher, you would have to report that transaction. Under that transaction, you do not. So this John Doe in St. Louis transferred $9,860 at 8:40 a.m. in St. Louis. The same John Doe also went down the road at 9:05 a.m., making another transaction to the same destination. And then again, and a 4th time, and a 5th time. So all of these transactions were made from 8:40 a.m. to 10:18 a.m., all within a relatively small area, all going to the same recipient, and all just under that $10,000 threshold. So using that model, we are able to sift through all of that information very quickly to pull out the fraudulent activity from those billions and billions of transactions into this small data set, the small group that we identified as possibly fraudulent activity. We can then use the total amount of money sent to prioritize where our investigations should go first. So this is one way geoanalytics can help your organization to find anomalies faster, to discover these anomalies in both space and time. So I'm going to pass it back to Mike, and we'll talk about the 3rd way GIS can enhance your organization's ability to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse.
Patrick, thank you. Very interesting. This is really a model that you created that's really based on maybe institutional knowledge from, let's say, an auditor, an inspector, and maybe an investigator. And having this information now, we can put that model in play against the billions of points. And really what you've demonstrated to me is that in those billions of points and transactions, you've boiled this down to 3 possible scenarios that you can prioritize your resources to go after and say, this is probably highly suspicious anomaly that we need to go after. So this is pretty interesting. A very fast way to do this, and actually what we call burning down that haystack down to that needle. So the next one is what I think is pretty interesting. It really is about once you have a good tradecraft and finding information based on location, it really is. You're starting to know and model and predict the environments that maybe would be ripe for fraud and abuse. And so this one here is really interesting because once we have historic data, I think Patrick is going to show you some interesting things that come out of how we now can actually do this. Let me take you back one more. So Patrick, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So, using GIS to make predictions about our data. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at two different maps, all based off of the same data set. So this data set is MRI costs at hospitals across the United States. So each hospital has a location, and it has an average charge per MRI at that location. So the map on the left is an analysis done from that data. So this map is a cost and cluster outlier. So what's interesting about this map is this takes the charge of the MRIs at these hospitals and puts them into clusters. So the black and the green dots indicate high clusters and low high clusters. So the black dots indicate hospitals that are charging a premium for their MRIs in an area that is also charging a premium. The low high are hospitals charging a low cost for the MRIs in an area with high charges for MRIs. But what really stands out are the orange dots. These are the high-low clusters. So this means, based off of this analysis, these hospitals are charging a premium for their MRIs in an area that is generally charging a very low amount for the MRIs. So if we zoom in here and look at this hospital here in Pittsburgh, this is University of Pittsburgh Medical Center at St. Margaret, they're charging an average of $3,344 per MRI, where just down the road, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center at McKeesport is charging a much less. So this enables us to use our data to find the anomalies. Now, how GIS can be used to predict events that may happen is the map on the right. So this is the MRI cost prediction. This analysis was used using our data set of the MRI cost at hospitals and creating a cost surface analysis. So we can predict what we can predict to be the average charge per an MRI in the area. So what's really interesting about this map is if we zoom in here to this really big red dot, it's over Richmond, Virginia, which is very interesting. So we can predict if a new hospital were to pop up in Richmond charging a premium, that we can predict if a new hospital were put in Richmond, they would generally charge a premium. As it relates to the left, these are the black dots. These are high hospitals that are charging a high amount that are also in an area of hospitals charging a high amount. But if we look into here in between Altoona and Pittsburgh, in this area here, this really blue area, if a hospital were to be placed there that is charging a premium, we can possibly identify that as an outlier and possibly fraudulent activity. So that is one way that GIS can make predictions and detect and analyze patterns to offer better predictions about future trends of our organization. So I'm going to pass it back to Mike, and we'll talk about the final way GIS can improve your organization's ability to combat fraud, rates, and abuse.
Thank you, Patrick. That's really interesting. So really what you've laid out to me is a national map that can tell me that when a red dot shows up in those blue areas, we can set up an alert and essentially say we should investigate that hospital and find out why the costs are so high versus the environment around them. So this is pretty interesting, and I think it makes it very easy now for us to find and detect these things if we know patterns and environments ahead of time. So the final one that I want to talk about, which I always like, is really the ability to provide management really a good, holistic, real-time view of the activities that are happening with my staff, and also look at the activities that's based on maybe alerts and the actual investigations that are happening. This is always good for management, really, to find out how things are going, where there's a lot of activity, and also how to resource my staff to those areas that need high priority. So I'd like to have Patrick kind of jump into what I always call a dashboard, but really this dashboard is providing that holistic view to the organization.
Okay, thank you, Mike. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this scenario and set up this dashboard. So the ability for GIS to enhance our organization's workflow to finally set us up with that holistic view of our organization's status. So this is looking at gas card fraud for an organization in the state of Florida. So we get a spreadsheet of transactions that looks like this. So what we want to do is first, as geographers, we want to map these transactions to see the dispersion of these transactions. We're also going to do some simple analysis to plot the truck's likely route. So these transactions were all coming from a trucking route going from Tampa Bay to Tallahassee. So we can see the optimal route here, and we can buffer that by 10 miles to account for people pulling off of the highway and gassing up. But what's really interesting are these transactions that are found outside of this 10-mile buffer. And we can use smart mapping to prioritize our investigations. So if we look at this legend indicates that the darker the dots, the more transactions that are occurring at each of these gas stations. And the size of the dot indicates the average transaction amount. So what pops out immediately is down here in Kissimmee, Florida. So we can quickly identify these possibly fraudulent activities. So at this suspicious gas station, at this BP, there have been a total of 12 transactions with an average transaction amount of $788. That is a major red flag, and that should be a priority of our investigations. So now I'm going to move to a dashboard setting. So this dashboard setting gives us a holistic view of our operation status. It gives us total situational operational awareness, and it gives us the ability to enhance decision-making processes. So what we can see here is we can see the data, the dots on the map. So this data is driving these dashboard attributes. So we can see the total number of open investigations, which are the orange squares. We can also see the investigations currently under review and the investigations that are closed. Now, these closed investigations all have either fraudulent activity identified or non-fraudulent activity identified. So with this, we can say that we have a total of 7 fraudulent cases totaling $5.5 million. And we also have 20 investigations that are currently in review that total $15.1 million. So this is a really easy way to connect to our data to show the situational and operational awareness of our organization. It also allows us to have in widgets so we can highlight where is the largest open amounts currently. So this is connected to our data. This is being driven off of real-time data. So once the data in the database changes, we can see that change happen in this dashboard, giving us this very nice holistic view for leadership to know the status of their operations. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Mike. Thank you.
Patrick, very nice. That's very interesting because what you've demonstrated to me is the ability to take even some of the anomalies that we're trying to calculate or analyze, and also even some of the predictions and putting those right here on the dashboard with the analyst activity to find out really what's going on for the whole entire organization and how they're operating. So very interesting. Really, this is really communicating the activities and the work up the chain of management, which is one of the best things that you can do to kind of support this big problem that's happening in government. So I want to go back and just review what we just went over. Make sure I get this. Oh. There we go. Sorry. So let's review what Patrick just demonstrated to us today. First, he did fuse disparate data together from different activities, from maybe one from an auditor, one from an inspector. But what this essentially did was, by location, he was able to set up a better way to communicate and collaborate this information based on a common denominator, location. And from there, he put some basic distance tools in there to say, there are some funny things going on here with claims actually happening in California, but the actual delivery of those claims is actually happening out of state. The other thing was finding anomalies, really diving into a lot of information and burning through this information very quickly, within minutes, versus something that may take maybe years to do. The third thing was predict and detect environments for fraud, really start to understand patterns that are happening nationally, even at the state local level, for you to be able to say, when something happens, the transaction happens there that's out of the environment, set up an alert by exception. And the final thing is Can I put some type of location-based management tool to help me understand how to allocate resources efficiently when I know there's something trending in terms of fighting fraud, waste, and abuse? So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Emily, and then let's get Erin in here to talk about some of the successes she has doing the same things that we're demonstrating at the USPS.
Definitely, and thank you so much, Mike and Patrick. That was a wonderful way to kind of kick off this training and to help us kind of understand these 4 great examples a bit more. I do want to remind everyone that you can be submitting questions to that Q&A box. We will get to some of those towards the end, so make sure you are submitting those questions. All right, it is now time to turn things over to Erin Grimm, who's going to tell us all about how USPS has already started to implement and use these tools. So on to you, Erin. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Emily. So today I'm going to give you a slew of examples of how we at the Postal Service Office of Inspector General have utilized fraud and utilized GIS to detect fraud, waste, and misconduct. It looks like there's a variety of you in the attendance menu there from quite a variety of backgrounds. So hopefully I have something for each of you. But before I get into the fun stuff, I do want to provide some of the more boring background just to give you all a framework. So the overall mission at the Postal Service OIG is to help maintain confidence in the postal system. And we do this through audits and investigations. Through audits, we look at the efficiency of programs and operations, and through investigations is where we really focus on preventing and detecting fraud, waste, and misconduct. So I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the Postal Service, but I want to give you just a few fun facts so you can start to really think about how you can visualize Postal Service data. So a fun fact that I thought was very interesting is that the Postal Service delivers more mail over a larger geographical area than any other post in the world. So that's pretty impressive. So what this means in terms of data is that we have 153.9 million delivery points that we're delivering to every day, which equates to 244,365 delivery routes. And there's a little over 32,000 total facilities within the Postal Service. And of course, there's hundreds of billions of pieces of mail per year being delivered. So if you think of this in terms of data, you can imagine just how much data that could add up to be. And the great thing about postal data is that it's all geographically driven. So each of these delivery points is a point on a map. All these routes are lines on a map. The facilities are also points on a map. And even our pieces of mail, we have scan data now, so we're tracking all these packages, so we know where the package is over time. So every day at a certain point in time, that package gets scanned and the X and Y get embedded in that data. So that's another way that we visualize the data. So this lends itself to GIS very much so. So within the OIG, our GIS shop is within our Chief Data Office and within our Analytics Lab, which is composed of a slew of people. We have DBAs, we have data scientists, we have analysts, report writers, project managers, and software specialists. And all these people can wear individual hats, or one person can wear all of these hats. So it really just depends on the project. And then also within our lab, our main focus is to provide leads for investigators and give direction for our audit. So help audit narrow down where they should be focusing. And we rely heavily on our subject matter experts for each of these areas. We may know how to manipulate the data, how to visualize the data, how to run analytics on it, but if we don't know the common schemes that are occurring, it's really, our services are kind of obsolete at that point. So we rely heavily on their knowledge of what's happening out on the ground for us to then apply that to the data to give them legitimate leads and focuses for their audits. Okay, so let's get into the fun examples. So this is just like the demonstration that Patrick gave with fuel card transactions. So the Postal Service has millions of people helping to deliver the mail. We have a lot of contractors that help us transport mail from point A to point B. And these contractors get assigned a fuel card so that they can be purchasing gas along their routes. Well, we want to make sure that they're purchasing the proper fuel and they're using these cards solely to transport mail, because when they're not transporting mail, these contractors can also be using their trucks to deliver other goods for other companies. So we use the same methodology that Patrick went over. We map out where the route should be, all the stops they have to make to deliver the mail. We use GIS to calculate the optimal route that they should take, and then we plot the fuel transactions on the map. And then once we apply that buffer, we can easily find outliers. And in doing so, we were able to find one particular contractor that had over $5 million in unauthorized fuel purchases. That contractor was then debarred and suspended from doing any more federal work and working with the Postal Service. So you can see it's very valuable, simple, but very effective. Sometimes, though, we don't need analytics, and we just need a visual to portray what we want, and this is, of course, great for using GIS for. So this is a particular map of a healthcare provider. We had 5 particular providers, as you can see in the legend on the bottom left there, and they were all involved in kickback schemes. And the particular agent working this case wanted to go to the prosecutor with a case of, this is a particular provider we should be pursuing and where we should be pursuing them. So you can see that provider 5 by far has the most claims throughout the U.S. Throughout the U.S. And then the states are color coded there by the total payments. So you can see that Illinois, Florida, and Pennsylvania are some of the states that have the larger amount of claims. In this next example, we were looking at waste from an audit perspective. Postal Service has these particular machines called delivery sortation systems, and they help sort mail at the plant level. And audit wanted to focus in on the Northern Virginia area. They wanted to say, okay, where do we currently have these machines? How much are they being used? Are they being used efficiently and effectively, or could they be utilized elsewhere? So in this particular map, it shows the locations of where these DSS machines are, and they're sized by their usage. So the larger that blue dot, the more the machines are being used. And it might be kind of hard for you all to see, but there are numbers overlaying each of those dots to say how many machines are at those particular locations. So using those, audit can quickly determine where these particular machines aren't being leveraged as much as they should, and start auditing where they should be moved to so they can be made more useful. In this next example, we were looking at delayed mail. So the map here shows plant locations. The red plants are those that typically have delayed mail. Those that are green are more efficient plants. They're sized by the amount of delayed mail. So those that are red, the larger ones have more delayed mail, and the green ones that are larger are much more efficient. And it's all interactive. You can click on each of the plants. You can get more information about the plant, including a breakdown of the type of mail, which is what the pie chart shows. So this, again, helps audit focus their audits. They say, okay, well, this is clearly an issue, and we need to visit this plant, or this plant's doing really well over time. Let's go visit this plant and see what they're doing, and maybe we can replicate that to some other plants that are struggling. This next example is another audit. It's very heavy in analytics, but what audit wanted to do was a passport optimization project. So we have all these passport locations where you can go and either renew your passport or apply for a passport, and they want to determine, well, what makes one successful more than another one, and could we consolidate? So the overall goal was to kind of create a geographic profile to see, are there common geographic factors at each of those locations that are successful? So if we can find these common factors, that tend to lend towards success, then maybe we can duplicate them or relocate some existing facilities to areas like that and reproduce some of the success that we're seeing at these locations. So we define success as having a continually increasing growth rate over a 3-year period. So we use data from FY12 to FY14 to calculate the growth rate. And then we created a geographic profile using GIS. We looked at over 200 criteria, and these are some of them: population, income, distance to airports, distance to their passport facilities. We looked at education. We looked at age. Like I said, it was about 200 criteria, basically based around census information. So each of these passports got assigned this geographic profile of what's the average age, what's the average income, what's the population in this area that this particular facility services. So we visualized the data, and this is another interactive map. All the purple squares represent passport facilities that were highly successful, and the ones that are red were not as successful. And again, they're sized by the growth rate. So those that have, the red ones that are larger have a much lower growth rate, a very high decreasing growth rate, whereas the purple ones are increasing and the number of passports they're issuing. And again, we have a pop-up here to give more information about the type of services and the hours that they're open. And then there's a nice little bar graph at the bottom there of the pop-up that shows the number of passports by FY. So you can see this particular one is really increasing with each FY. So what's interesting is that through all this analysis, through all of the criteria that we filtered through, we didn't really find any correlation. The only thing that we found was that a passport facility tended to be more successful if it was closer to a shopping center. This could be just out of pure convenience, but at least we had a little bit of information to then give audit to then go do a little bit of digging of why that would be. But we thought that was pretty interesting. We thought we would see some correlations at least with age or income, but no, just the distance to a shopping center. So then what we decided to do was look at it from a consolidation perspective. Where do we have passport facilities that are highly successful, but yet they're near passport facilities that aren't performing as well? So here's 4 particular locations spread throughout the U.S., and the ones in green are the ones that are increasing in the number of passports that they're issuing every year, whereas the red ones are decreasing. So if you look closely, hopefully you all can see the numbers, but there tends to be a clear movement where people are relocating from the red facilities to the green facilities. So this is a great opportunity for audit to then go visit these locations and say, why is this? Is it wait time in line? Is it customer service? And kind of start to understand the root of the problem. And then maybe something, whatever they find in their audit, could then be applied to other locations. So our next example looks at misconduct. And this particular project was called Double Dip. This is where we were looking at employees who were not only getting paid as employees, but they were getting paid as contractors. And in the federal space, for those of you who are in the federal space, you'll understand this, that there's a lot of Data Matching Act issues. And sometimes getting around that, you can leverage GIS. So we couldn't do direct matches. And even if we did a direct match on the employee and contractor table, you'd have to use, fuzzy matching logic to get the addresses to line up. And of course, if you're using different systems, street's going to be spelled out over here. It's going to be abbreviated in the other table. So you might not have a match even though it is a match. So we decided to use GIS to see what we could do. So what we did was we mapped out our employee locations, their home addresses. And then we took our contractors and we mapped those out. And then we applied like a really finite, limited buffer around these to see which ones are in close proximity. And we found quite a number that either it was the same person or it could have been another household member that was the contractor. And one location, we had a postmaster who had hired his wife for snow removal, and she was paid $32,000 one winter for removing snow, but she actually did zero snow removal work. So that's one thing that we found out of this particular project. And then our next example is a more recent one that we're still fine-tuning, but we were looking at where do we have a high number of employees seeing the same provider. So this could allude to the provider doing a kickback for the employee of, okay, you send your colleagues to me and I'll give you some cash back and I'll charge extra for services. I'll charge the insurance for all these services that I'm not actually providing, but in turn, I'm going to give you cash back. So this is starting to look at that, and because, again, of data matching issues, we turn to GIS to help us visualize that. So we don't have any outcomes from this yet because we're still tweaking the logic, but I thought maybe it would be beneficial to some of you all to see. So we also use GIS to look at internally our strategy. How are we doing at the OIG? Could we be more efficient? So we have a strategy dashboard for our agents. So the Postal Service is broken up by these service areas, and so we shadow these same areas. So we have our management covering each of these areas, and then we have our agents dispersed by these areas. So what we want to look at is, by these different areas, do we have offices in the right location, and do we have agents in the right location? Or are there gaps that we need to fill in? So this map portrays exactly that. So the black circles there represent our office locations, and they're sized by the number of agents at that particular office. And you can see there's a number there that shows just how many agents we have. And then the zip codes are color-coded by the number of cases and allegations that we have. So the more red the zip code, the more cases and allegations, basically the more work we have in this particular location. As you get down the yellow, it's not quite as much work. So if you look at Central Maine there, you'll see kind of a cluster of orange. You have a couple of zip codes that are orange, meaning, we have more work there, but yet there's not an office nearby. So that means we're either paying travel time for our agents or we're paying for a contractor to be in that area. So we can look at this over time. If this is a common trend over time where we constantly have work in this area, then that alludes to the fact that we need to either set up an office there or have an agent in that area. So my last demo, and hopefully this will work, is showing two side-by-side videos. On the left-hand side, I haven't hit play yet, so I just want to set it up for a minute. On the left-hand side, you're going to see a video playing of a carrier going out to make his deliveries, and there's nothing unusual that day. And on the right-hand side, this is the same carrier with the same route, and that day he's got a narcotics package that he's delivering. So I'll walk you through it, but on the left, he's got no narcotics package. On the right, he does have a narcotics package. And just visualizing this, you can see how different his route is. So on the left, they're both starting at the delivery unit. He's already taken off on the day that he doesn't have the drug package. And he's off doing his route. And of course, this is sped up, so you guys don't have to sit here for a full day and watch. But you can see on the right-hand side, the day that he has a narcotics package, he's much slower to start, and then once he leaves, he even stalls for 9 minutes at this other location before taking off again. So as we follow him on the right-hand side, he stops at this particular location for 12 minutes, where on the left-hand side, he didn't stop there. He kept going about his day. And you can see on the left-hand side, he's still moving around there. And on the right-hand side, after he stopped there for 12 minutes, he went and did his route. But you'll see he comes back to the same location 3 times throughout this day and spends quite a bit of time there. So he returns and now he's been there for 21 minutes at this particular location. So what's interesting is I helped the agent create these videos and send them to him. And what they did was they used this information to set up a camera pole at that particular location on the right where you see the carrier. And they were able to capture him delivering a package that day to a particular person. So what ended up happening was they were able to use the footage from the camera to get a confession of the carrier, that he knew that he was involved in drug dealing. So had they not had the visuals and all of this material on the particular carrier, they might not have gotten the confession. Okay, so just some quick lessons learned here, especially for those starting out. A huge one is build on the data source. Build as close as you can to the data source. You don't want to get in the habit of doing ETL processes and copying large amounts of data. If you can build on the data source, that's ideal, and it's going to streamline everything for you. Keep your results simple. You might do some really heavy analytics, but if you can't portray them in a simple way to your customer or to colleagues, then they might not get used if they can't understand what the output is. And make sure you're leveraging the proper folks. So I mentioned earlier how we have subject matter experts, and we're sure to include them in every step of the way. You know, I've done GIS work for 11 years, so that's my baby, that's what I know, but I usually don't know the data, and I don't know the scheme, so I rely heavily on other people to give me that information so that my output is the best that it can be for them, and so it's useful. And another item, it's always helpful to have a dedicated and trained IT support staff. Otherwise, you get in the habit of doing it yourself, and that can become overbearing and take away from the actual GIS work that needs to be done. And then always get the bigger picture from the customer. A lot of times the customer comes to me and says, well, I think a map would be interesting. I don't really, I can't really think about what it looks like. I'm not sure really how it would be helpful, but I just feel like I need a map. And usually once I start digging and asking about the bigger picture, about what their project is all about, I can provide them with more analysis than they originally thought, because a lot of people don't quite understand GIS and just what it can do. It's not just visualization, that there's a lot of analytics behind it as well. So once I start giving them some other ideas of how it can help them, they get really excited. So it's always good to ask about what the overall goal is. And then lastly, keep an open mind, especially if you're running analytics. Kind of like my passport example, I really thought that I would see some sort of correlation with income or age, but I didn't. So it's always good to keep an open mind when you're going into a project so that you don't skew the results a certain way. And that's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin. Right before we get to your questions, Mike, I wanted to throw the floor back to you for a few minutes here, just so you can kind of bring both yours, Patrick's, and Erin's presentations all together. So I'm going to turn things back over to you for just a minute here.
Thanks, Emily. Let me go ahead and move the next slide forward. I really appreciate this very interesting stuff that Erin has demonstrated, but I want to just put this out there. Are you ready to test location tools today in your organization? Do you really want to start receiving some of the benefits that not only Patrick demonstrated, but really Erin has put in practice and actually doing this on a day-to-day basis? My response to you would be, please call Marcela Calavero. She's based in our DC office, and she's the one who's been working closely with the federal government to actually work on these fraud, waste, and abuse programs. And the final thing that I would also like to throw out to the audience is, if you want to learn more, we also have an opportunity for you to come to our FedGIS conference in DC in February. And it's a great way to meet users like Erin, other customers that are doing very similar problems, doing similar techniques for their problems. And they actually like to be there to share some of their stories and their experiences and meet peers that want to learn how to do this. So I invite you to go to the URL here and to see if you'd like to come to this event for federal agencies. It's free for you to attend, so we invite you to come.
Definitely, and I think from all past attendees to that conference, they can truly attest it was a wonderful experience and they learned a lot. So I definitely encourage people to check that out. We do have some questions into our Q&A portal, so we're going to get through as many as we can in the remaining 10 minutes. And Aaron, I'm going to start with you. You gave a great example of, some of what the Postal Service is doing to kind of combat some of the fraud that you guys have seen. What has been sort of the biggest challenge that you guys have faced in kind of getting that program set up and kind of working through some of the initial sort of roadblocks there?
I think our biggest hurdle is always data access because we're the OIG, we're on a different network than the Postal Service is. So a lot of the data we have to copy over, and Postal Service has no small data sets. So it's getting access and being able to store all of that data. But we're starting to build more and more things on the postal network and move them out of our environment. So that's helping.
I can imagine that you guys really don't have very few small data sets, so that would be particularly challenging. Mike, I know you were talking about sort of the 4 components that sort of bring together all of this stuff into one kind of area, disparate data sets and all of that. When you go out and you're talking to some of these agencies, what is the thing that agencies are kind of struggling to understand the most?
I think the biggest struggle is for them to understand the technology, but once it's demonstrated, and once we show the very simple marriage between or the mashup of their data with somebody else's data, it immediately just, they come to attention. They said, oh, I didn't know we could do that. And I think that is probably taking some very quick data sets and trying this out is probably the things that really sparks the ideas and then sparks more innovation and trying to do more with location strategies.
Definitely. And Patrick, from your perspective, you're going out there, you're talking to people, you're connecting this idea of maps and data. What have you seen sort of as the reaction been in 2016? Do people get it, or are you still trying to kind of pitch the idea to them?
Well, it's very interesting. It's kind of both. They seem to grasp the idea once we demonstrate it with data that's relevant to them. Because in the past, GIS hasn't traditionally been used in the fraud, waste, and abuse field. So once we do show them how it can be used in the fraud, waste, and abuse field, then the light clicks on and they say, wow, I didn't know we could do that. I didn't know that GIS had this type of capabilities and that it can be implemented in my workflows, not to totally change my workflows, but to help my workflows to make better and more informed decisions.
Yeah, and to that point, Mike, kind of what software are we using here? What is this technology that we're actually using to kind of add this mapping element to fraud detection?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The technique that Patrick demonstrated to you was a little bit of our cloud technology and also our desktop technology. It's all part of a platform that we sell to the government. And I think one of the questions came from one of our USDA guests who are actually attending this webinar today. And by chance, it turns out that USDA has an enterprise license agreement with us on most of the tools, so they have access to get to this right now, and just a matter of having somebody very good like Patrick get out there and say, let me show you how to do it.
Awesome. So Aaron, obviously 2016 coming to an end here. What are you hoping that you guys can kind of develop next year in your office to kind of bring more mapping technology to the forefront? What are you working on?
Yeah, so we are actually starting to venture into some really exciting stuff. We're getting more and more into scan data, and that's where we've started to build on the Postal's network just because of the volume of data associated with scan data. So we're using scans to look at a couple things to kind of start leading audits in the customer service area where these delivered scans happening. Are they happening at the customer's doorstep? Because when that delivered scan happens, the customer gets notified, hey, there's a package at your doorstep. Well, if there's not a package at the doorstep, that's not good customer service. So we're using that for audits, but we're also using scans to look at mail theft and narcotics. So that's super exciting. And then we're also doing some more customized work. We've recently hired a GIS developer, and they're starting to scrape Yelp reviews of facilities to look at what kind of reviews each of our facilities are getting and where the problem areas are. It's very cool stuff that we're doing.
Yeah, it is really cool, and especially at this time of year, there are so many packages being delivered. I can only imagine how useful that technology is going to be kind of going forward. Mike, same sort of question on to you here. What is Esri working on going into 2017 that the agencies out there that are listening can kind of really grab onto it and kind of use in next year?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, we kind of talked about that very simple start, but really what we're starting to do is really scale and get into large volume analytics to really dive into that needle in the haystack, right? And so what you're really going to see next year is a big adoption of this kind of technology to use clusters of computers to really rip through all this information and actually start to tease out more information for inspectors and auditors to go after. Find those anomalies that really helps them be very successful and actually help them prioritize their time.
Definitely. And Patrick, bring us home here. Obviously, I'm sure you're going to say much the same thing that Mike just said, but what are you really looking forward to in 2017?
Okay, great. So what I'm really looking forward to is the way that Esri and the ArcGIS platform is moving. Traditionally, we have been used as a system of engagement. So the ability to engage our data in a different way, a system of record, the ability to take our data and to spatialize it and to create that database. But what we're moving towards is a system of insight. Being able to draw out conclusions from our data, being able to predict and to see patterns and trends of our data. That is the movement forward for Esri, and it's really exciting time coming out with our 10.5 release, which was released last week. It's going to be a very exciting time, and I encourage everybody to attend our Federal Users Conference in February to see the road forward for our company, for Esri.
I definitely think our audience will be marking their calendars for that. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. Mike, Patrick, and Aaron, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I do have a few quick reminders before we sign off. We will email you a link to the on-demand version of this training, so make sure you check your inboxes for that. The evaluation, slide deck, and great resources are also available for download in the resources section and in the on-demand version, so you can take advantage of those in both places. Our goal with these trainings is to help you do your job better. We really appreciate and value the work that you do every day, so thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. On behalf of Mike, Patrick, Aaron, and myself, I hope you enjoyed our training, 4 Ways GIS Helps Fight Fraud, and a special thank you to Esri for helping us put it on. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you at our next online training.
Happy holidays. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.